Good afternoon and welcome to Navigating New Solution Requests, Balancing Cost, Integration, and Innovation, a health system CIO production sponsored by iHarbor, the University of Maryland Medical Center's Innovation Center. I think I said that wrong. System Innovation Center. Okay. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name's Anthony Guerra. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Health Systems CIO, and I'll be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. You could send in your questions or comments anytime in the Q&A box, and we'll take them later in the program. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today. First, we're going to have our main panel discussion featuring Warren D'Souza, SVP and Chief Innovation Officer with the University of Maryland Medical System and co-director of the University of Maryland Institute for Health Computing. Anika Gardenhire, Chief Digital and Information Officer with Ardent Health Services, and Kay Marhefka, DHA, Deputy CIO at RWJ Barnabas Health in the beautiful state of New Jersey, where I hail from as well. And then we will have our Q&A. So let's jump right in. Warren, do you want to give us an overview of your organization and your role?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Anthony, thanks for hosting this. My name is Warren D'Souza. I serve as the Chief Innovation Officer for the University of Maryland Medical System. We are a 11-hospital health system that's headquartered in Baltimore, Maryland, serving large geographies and diverse geographies in the state of Maryland. We deliver about 25% of the hospital-based care in the state of Maryland. And we're foundational partners with our state university, the University of Maryland, Baltimore, with a faculty practice and employed physician group and roughly 30,000 team members. So honored and privileged to be part of this conversation today.
Excellent, Warren. Thank you. Anika?
Hi, I'm Anika Gardenhire. I'm the Chief Digital and Transformation Officer at Ardent Health. We are an organization of around 30 hospitals, 200 sites of care, partnering mostly with academic medical centers like the University of Texas, Hackensack, University of Kansas, others. And we support overall health system management as well as providing partnership from a capital perspective. And in my role, I'm responsible for all things digital, data, security, technology, as well as the consumer experience, and our contact centers and those great things. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you for everyone who's listening now and anyone who might listen later.
All right. Thank you, Anika. Kay?
Good afternoon, everyone. Anthony, thank you for inviting me back. I always enjoy being on these panels. These are a lot of fun, and I learn a lot even when I'm part of the panel that is speaking. I am the Deputy Chief Information Officer for RWJ Barnabas Health. My focus is on the ambulatory side of our business. We are the largest academic health center in the state of New Jersey. We are the clinical partner to Rutgers University Medical School. We're huge. We have 14 hospitals and counting. We have over 300 medical group practice locations. We have over 9,000 physicians. That includes our affiliates, independent physicians, as well as our employed. We have about 45,000 employees. We are an Epic shop. We have one instance of Epic that is in place. We completed our implementation about a year and a half ago. So every hospital, every practice, every physician is on one instance of Epic. And let's see, we have about $2.5 million patient ambulatory visits a year, just to kind of give you the sense of, again, of how large we are, and that my focus and the responses to the questions today will be based a lot on what we're doing on the ambulatory side.
Awesome. Thank you, Kay. All right. This is a big open-ended question, and we'll touch on, I'm sure, lots of areas in the answers, and we'll drill down further on those. So Warren, let's start with you. How do you handle new application requests?
Yeah, so that's the $1 million question, Anthony. No pun intended, obviously. I think for us, this has been an evolving journey. We are actually in the midst of revamping a lot of our governance structure. And I know the G word is often sometimes connoted as a bad word in healthcare systems, depending on who you're talking to. But I think it starts with um, governance and alignment to strategic objectives. We have um, we have many, many requests. There's never a week that goes by without somebody who is advocating for potentially a new application or a new technology, all with very good intent. But it becomes incumbent upon leaders within the health system to align on sort of the strategic priorities and determine from a prioritization standpoint what rises to the top and where the strategic investments might be warranted. Um, it also matters in terms of the global health, if you will, within the health system of the tech stack and understanding the alignment with what exists already in the ecosystem, ensuring or avoiding, I should say, redundancy, but also ensuring that we have all of the appropriate guardrails in place in terms of uh, ownership, interoperability, technical debt, total cost of ownership, all of those considerations when we factor in some of these new requests.
All right, very good. Anika?
So very similarly to several of the things already stated, the one thing that I would add is we about 2 years ago had a leadership conference, and in that leadership conference, I had the opportunity to speak with the broader executive team. And in my best Jerry Maguire, I begged, help me help you. Because this is one of the biggest problems I think health system IOs face is the desire for more and more and more technology solutions, mostly at the app layer. Um, and the reality of the inability to give the customer base that while keeping your KOR costs down. So you're keeping operations running costs, right? And so it's that tug of war always between I would like to have more applications. Why is your maintenance cost going up every year? And in my head, every time I want to go, how are you asking me that? But I don't, right? I say, well, when we add applications, we have to have additional infrastructure. We also need different types of people to support the applications because oftentimes it's not on the same technology, right? And you go about trying to explain those things. And so what we've really tried to do is to take the posture of solving problems. And so we revamped a governance committee that we had that was often reviewing new technology. Um, and we revamped it to be called our Impact and Transformation Committee. So bring us your problems, right? What impact are you trying to have? Please marry your problem. Know your problem really well. Be very close to your problem. Please don't marry a solution. And so then we take the onus of partnering with our business colleagues, our clinical colleagues, of saying, now we have a good shared understanding of the problem. Let's create a shared solution so that teams are not behind the eight ball, right? Where leaders are simply saying, I've been married to this problem and talking about this problem for 5 years. Finally, I got in front of a committee where somebody could listen to me. And if I've known about the problem for 5 years, I definitely married a solution. And why are you just being so slow and not solving my problem? Because I already know the solve. And so instead, we just tried to get a bit earlier on the curve and say, as soon as you know you have a problem,
Mm.
come to the committee. We will partner and we will help you so that we can get to a solution together faster. And then it gives us the ability to do some of the things that we've already talked about, like determine whether or not we already have an application that will solve it, figure out if there's something in the market that we need to survey, do more of a broader RFP if that's what's needed, those types of things.
So changing sort of the culture, the messaging from don't come with the solution, come with the problem.
Please come with the problem. Yes.
Very good. Okay.
So app request uh, in our world at RWJBH equals project. So we don't take app requests and treat them differently than we do any other project that comes by way of that comes to IT. So when we receive a project request, and yes, they definitely could include being an application ask. We have a really well-defined structure, and it is based on governance. That it goes through a flow of decision making where there is almost with the level of certainty as to whether it should move forward or not based on the committee that it needed to go to and the different factions of, AI component, doesn't align with our strategic vision, within the organization. There is some redundancy, whatever it is. It has passed through those points in the flow to basically say, move on, stop, turn it back, or whatever it is. But it is always treated as a project, and it enters that web of what a little complex, but it makes sense and it's necessary. But it enters there from our operations folks, from our operations colleagues, by way of ServiceNow, so that it's visible not only to our operations side and IT, but that just helps to create that flow, and it helps to establish muscle memory on the part of our operational colleagues. Where do I start when I have an idea or I have a thing I want to buy, or I have a problem I want to solve? Thank you, Anika. I'm going to take that with me. And if it stems from within IT, we start that with Workfront. So, but both entry points have created for us basically a single point of entry, which we found was absolutely imperative for us to get control of these asks. And that has worked really, really well for us.
Yeah, so it's an interesting concept. Okay, let's go into that a little more. This idea of establishing some sort of control on this. I mean, and you mentioned, web, the concept sounds like the concept of filters can apply with these committees. We need to uh, s- have established pathways. You mentioned two pathways for these things to come in, and then there need to be filters because in a large organization, things could just get out of control. So we don't want to kill innovation and have everyone say, well, forget it. I'm not bringing any ideas up there because I got to jump through 11 hoops. There has to be a balance, right? Because if there are no hoops, then we're inundated with half-baked ideas and hey, this just came to me last night. The bar has to be high enough that it requires more work on the requester's end than that, but doesn't completely shut off any sort of bottom-up flow of innovation and ideas. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. We do put a lot of onus on the person or teams bringing the app or idea or whatever it is, project, to the forefront. There is a very standard set of forms, if you will, that they have to complete, and an S-bar. That's mandatory. There's a lot of information that they need to provide so that it can move correctly through those committees and those councils and the decision makers. And if they do it, and it's very clear, if they follow instructions and they are very complete in the information that is required, it actually speeds that process up a little bit. And from the very beginning, it helps that person or team feel that they are part of that decision making. And it's not just IT saying, no. They learn along the way. We learn along the way. But we put a lot of onus on the folks bringing the app or the project into play.
Very good, Warren. Any thoughts on what you're hearing?
One thing I would just sort of, in terms of the framing of this, particularly in our health system, we are trying to make space for preemptively identifying what is the role of technology in specific problem areas. So rather than waiting for everyone to sort of come into this ecosystem in a one-off fashion, we are trying to preempt and understand the role of a shared leadership model to align around our strategic priorities. And for example, the ubiquity now of AI-based technology solutions. Where is the play in terms of the various domains? And so that, to some degree, mitigates the endless queue, if you will, of projects or solutions or dare I say, vanity projects, perhaps, that might surface within the ecosystem. But understanding proactively what the opportunity matrix is, because there is an opportunity cost sometimes of not adopting or not investing in the right technologies, in the right spaces, again, aligned with, as Annika mentioned, the core business problems or elements that a health system is trying to pursue, as it might be in our case.
Warren, any more you want to add about your governance revamp that you're working on?
Yeah, so we're a almost $6 billion enterprise, and so as you can imagine, we are a highly matrixed organization with a faculty practice group, an employed physician group, and then obviously independent physician groups. And so corralling various constituencies is a full-time project in and of itself. But what we're trying to strive towards is shared risk and reward type ecosystems where everybody feels like they can lean into and has a piece of the pie and that there's an interconnectedness with the outcomes and the risks associated with the global enterprise. So our university colleagues, our faculty practice, our health system, which is a private not-for-profit corporation. And so in that, we are very intentional in ensuring a cross-functional stakeholder leadership that not only involves technologists, so certainly sort of your CIO, myself, various aspects of the technical parts of the organization, but also bringing in our clinical and operational leadership to lean in and engage in those discussions and be part of the decision-making process so that this doesn't become just a quote-unquote IT or a AI. I often get asked, what's my AI strategy? And I go, well, the AI strategy has to be in support or has to be to some degree aligned with the business and clinical strategy, because we are, after all, healthcare organizations, not tech organizations first. And so, for us, governance is really about starts with the premise that we embrace a shared leadership model, and that permeates into having shared decision-making rights with this cross-functional group, including individuals who potentially are responsible for lines of our clinical or business verticals where actually care is being delivered and where we have those interactions with patients and consumers.
Very good. And Anika, you mentioned some tweaks to governance and some changes in governance. I've always find governance very interesting. I especially find interesting the idea of revamping governance and wondering, is there a governance body that deals with revamping the governance of the organization? Right? Because at some point, who's who's you keep going up. Who's at the top gonna fix the top? Anyway, what are your thoughts?
I think that's fair. I think governance is sort of a forever evolution, right? I mean, people change, organizational cultures change, how the organization writ large is making decisions changes over time, right? So we're very fortunate to be in a very similar boat around, right, our sort of instance of Epic. So we are on one instance, all of the system, all of the practices, those types of things. And then we, recently chose our ERP. So those are sort of behemoths in the organization. From a foundational perspective, I think my goal is always to try, I always say, get to one to two of what I call the three-letter words of IT. So ERP, EHR, CRM, LIS, PACS. Like if you can get to like one of the three-letter words for most of the stack, then what you're really governing is around the edges, and like the integration conversations and pilots and those types of things become a lot easier. Now, just like most places, we're not there, right? But we are getting closer every day. And I think the organization sort of understands broadly that's the goal. For us, evolution of around governance continue to look like who's in the meeting, who's making the decisions. We also use ServiceNow. We use the demand process as well from an overall project perspective. But who can actually submit one? What questions are you asking on the form? How do you ask enough questions on the form, exactly as you mentioned, to have enough information to make a decision, but also not stifle innovation? Who's going to partner with the people to answer the questions on the form when they inevitably don't know the answers to the
Mm-hmm.
questions that go on the form? Um, and I think for us, what we were finding is part of the need for that was you'd get like further down where the rubber met the road of everything actually having to be one, right? So you can have 16 requests for Epic and a different set of requests for the ERP and another set for maybe plugins that go into, but then when you get to the infrastructure team, right? The the data center team is just like, hey, all the things meet over here. And so you guys really still do have to prioritize across your quote unquote portfolios or across your quote unquote list of forms. And I appreciate that you have these portfolios or separate groups or 15 different meetings. But at the end of the day, how am I supposed to figure out what's actually number one?
Mm.
And so I think for us, it was that continued evolution of understanding all of the stakeholder groups, where the decisions that come out of the governance flow, and then how do you actually get what all of the different constituencies need? Because we were missing a major set of constituencies who still needed the prioritization across the different groups that were meeting.
Fascinating. Kay, any thoughts on what you're hearing there?
So, really, thank you, Anika. Really well put in regards to the. I love how you said the three-letter words,
Mm-hmm.
the acronyms, and how on the periphery of that is where the governance really is so necessary. And because that's really that is us. I mean, we just also chose an ERP vendor, and we are very focused on CRM as well as our EHR. But there are still some things going on around that periphery. And my boss, Rob Adamson, our executive chief, corporate chief information officer, over the last few years, he has taken the role of the CIO and made absolutely certain that that person, being himself, is at the seat at the table with all the other stakeholders in the organization, where there's strategic decisions being made about where are we going to go as a powerhouse academic health system. Where are we growing, and what are the types of healthcare services do we want to start to be able to deliver that we haven't delivered before? So it's not an IT conversation, it's a thing conversation. Who are we and where are we going? And not that CIO role didn't sit there in the past. It did in parts and pieces. I've only been there for 7 years, but I've seen how it's evolved under Rob's leadership, and how he is absolutely essential for those conversations, and how the organization should look at technology, not for technology's sake, but absolutely for in response to where the organization is going, and where actually sometimes even where it's at now. And the technology, just we weren't there, we weren't ready yet. So that everything you said made me feel good about we're actually doing pretty good, because the things that you were saying were so positive, and it's like we're there.
All right, Kay, let's talk a little bit more. I mean, this is the core. the cool where we are today in this industry, it feels like we came from sort of a best of breed approach to the pendulum swung, and certainly a platform plays is where we are now, very deeply. And some of the most interesting decision points and conversations that have to be made are what we're talking about today. And as Anika said, it's around the periphery, it's around the requests. And let's get into that process because it's an interesting process when you get into the nuances of doing the analysis. Like we talked about how the requests come in, but there's an analysis that has to go on to decide if a point solution is going to be purchased and adopted. We can talk more about the how those things get weighted. I'm very interested in the weight placed on the opinion of the clinicians or the users or the operations people, especially when they're physicians and clinical folks. And the dynamic I'd like to explore a little more is this dynamic of good enough. So you have a request comes in, and a clinician may say, I like this tool. This tool's awesome. It'll help me in my practice and patient safety and all that stuff. There has to go into an evaluation process that looks at what do we have? Do we need this at all? And this is on some of our question slides, but do we need this at all? Or is technology not the solution to this problem? It's some sort of workflow or other issue. If it is a tool, do we have the tool? If we have the tool, is what we have good enough? If we don't have it, does our platform vendor offer it? If they offer it, is it good enough versus this point solution? Then there's got to be some complex weighting that goes into what it does versus the comparative tool, or whatever we're comparing it to. That could be multiple things. And it's just an odd position, I would think, to be in. That's why governance has to come in, and whatever committee's evaluating this has to include clinical folks, because you can't have IT saying, hey, we think the tool we have does 80% of what you're looking for, and that's the ratio we've come up with, so you're good. And you can't have a non-clinician telling a clinician that they're wrong about the value they're perceiving from a tool. So that's a long way of setting you up for this question of beyond we talked a little about the requests coming in and those mechanisms. What about this evaluation process in light of some of the scenarios I mentioned? Kay, we'll start with you and then we'll go around.
Okay, so I want to say, as you were talking through those things and what you want to be able to say to the clinician who brings something to the table like that, and I always in my head I was going check, 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 check. Exactly right, because we don't, even with Epic, sometimes we don't know what we have. We've gotten better and better and better at it since we've completed our implementation, and now we can look behind the curtain to see the power that's there, to see something. We were a very, very standard, non-customized implementation. We really were focused on that. So there were a lot of things, and even not customization related, but a lot of things that we didn't turn on until we understood it better, or things that we knew we didn't need it then, but we might need it now, and we don't know it as well. So we're still looking at our universal EHR vendor to make sure we're completely meeting the needs of our physicians, of our customers, and when they bring requests to us, to make sure that it isn't something that we already have and we just didn't know it. So there's that. We never say no. The answer is never no. If I get a phone call and nope, sorry, you can't do that. We're sticking to standard. No, none of us do that. We've actually revamped our IT structure so that we are trending towards more of a service line structure within IT, so that a cardiologist is actually speaking to a team of analysts and leaders who understand everything about cardiology,
Mm.
not just because they're the maintainers and supporters of an app. but because they truly understand that service line.
Mm,
So that has provided a lot of comfort for our clinicians to know that we are very, very intent on supporting them in their world and not just universally making sure that that they have an iPhone versus an Android, that sort of thing. So all of those things, we've been able to create a culture where I'm gonna say this is really off the top of my head. I feel like the culture that we have created has provided a sense of comfort for anyone in our organization to say to themselves, "Oh, I want that," but before I take it there, probably they're going to tell me Epic probably already does this. Um, and they're going to also tell me, but we're going to look behind that upper curtain and make sure that we have everything turned on so that the this is working to its optimum. We've created that level of comfort that we're working with them, not against them, and certainly not putting ourselves in a position where the only thing we care about is to stay standard,
mm.
simple, and cheap. So
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get into that more. That's an excellent point. Warren, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Anthony, so I'll pull on your thread of, good enough and thresholds. Um, I think that's more of a self-imposed sort of arbitrary way of thinking about things. I think we need to be a little more flexible than that because a one size fits all is not going to work. The
Hmm.
question is, in a world, if we adopt the stance of 80% is good enough, depending on the use case of the problem at hand, it may be the 20% that really matters, the remaining 20%. And so we've really taken the view of understanding what the problem scenario or statement is. Is this a transactional type of um, uh, technology solution? In which case, I think the anchor transaction platforms, the ERPs, the EMRs, should be the first place where you go look. These are heavy investments that health systems make. And so that's typically been our approach. As we evolve to more of the assistive, or sometimes even autonomous type of solutions, I do think there is a role for expanding the geography and the solution set while being mindful of the guardrails of appropriate integration, cost of ownership, um, ensuring that it doesn't disrupt other aspects of your organization. And I think what this comes down to from our perspective is what is the value proposition? The value proposition of doing something or considering an alternative compared to the uh, existing big iron vendors, um, as well as the opportunity cost of not doing something. So, if you in Maryland, we live in a very different kind of reimbursement ecosystem than anywhere else in the country. We are the only state in the country that operates under a capitated model for our hospitals. So our top line is essentially fixed. We don't typically get paid for doing more. So think of it as a massive ACO type ecosystem. Um, so our entire thesis is predicated on improving the bottom lines, the efficiencies, the productivities. And so in that kind of environment, we have to consider and be flexible in figuring out what makes most sense for our organization while respecting the investments that we make in some of our core technologies. So if we're talking about revenue cycle management or supply chain, are there incremental benefits to adopting or investing or developing technologies that appropriately integrate with our technology infrastructure, our global technology infrastructure, but provide that differential value, whether it's 10% or 50%, as long as that percentage of incremental value provides that value proposition that is deemed appropriate by our stakeholders, then those are the kinds of investments or areas that we tend to look beyond just the obvious solutions.
Excellent. Very good. Anika, what are your thoughts?
We've tried as an organization to be metric focused holistically. So starting at the highest level with the strategic plan. Um, and, I feel, really fortunate that the sort of global portfolio that is developed for where the organization is going year over year is visible, right, to the enterprise. And so you can see targets that are happening even for the biggest, most strategic initiatives. We are trying to get from A to B. And then when you start to distill those down through the enterprise, the nice thing is that if you're doing work to contribute to one of those things, you have clarity of target and sort of shared ownership. And what was really important, I think, about that is because you start to then expand the quote unquote governance and how you figure out what's going to be first or second beyond the technology team, in that if everybody's not lined up in the same way, you realize that you're creating new challenges. So, for example, if you think about, hey, we have this list of projects and they've been prioritized from one to N for the technology team, but it's a different prioritization for legal, right? Because they have things that didn't come to us, and it's a different prioritization for the supply chain team. So we're over here then left to do work then maybe without a purchased product or a legal agreement. That doesn't really work, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are prerequisites even before the
Right.
things come our way, or has it actually even been to capital committee? And so I think that for us, we've tried to make sure that the things that we're doing are much more in alignment to the strategic priorities of the organization, and then place the greatest weight there. And then ensuring that you can articulate your value equation in alignment with where the organization is going. And so I want this application because it's going to move this particular needle in service to this particular higher level strategic goal. And if your sentence doesn't really sound like that, then it's actually easier to, we also don't say no, but it's also easier to move you below the waterline is what we call it. So you are forever on the list, right?
Uh-huh.
But the conversation about where you sit as far as whether or not resources will actually get deployed toward the request is a different conversation, right? And I think that for us, that's really been a pretty significant um, catalyst to sort of how people also view the technology from a consumption perspective, right? The technology teams don't say no. She said, ask, have you been to legal? Have you been to procurement? Have you been to the capital committee? Have you been to all the places that you need to go before resources can actually be deployed in order to complete this work? And then that understanding also then helps filter down to, okay, so now where are you on the list based on where the organization writ large says we're going, and based on your hypothesis around the impact of the value equation that you're going to be able to have on a strategic priority that the organization is focused on.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. I want to talk a little bit about innovation. And I was just making this list of, because I think that you could have some tension within the C-suite. So the ever-growing, I call it the IT affiliated C-suite in a health system, and the alphabet soup of titles that we've got now. So on the one side, um, I would put titles that you could think of more as managing uh, the costs and keeping everything under control. That might be like a CIO, Of course, you're going to have innovative CIOs, but in general, CIO, CTO, CISO, infrastructure folks, data. I even put data on that side because I think they probably like organization and control. And then on the other side, and Warren's got this title, you have, and I think Anika, you mentioned transformation. I don't know if I had your title wrong, but on the other side, you have innovation, transformation. You could even throw the CMIOs and CNIOs over there. You got digital. And again, a lot of CIOs threw digital on their title, but let's put digital over on the more innovative side. You got AI. So you have these tensions even within the IT affiliated C-suite. Everybody wants to be thought of as innovative. Everybody wants to be thought of as good stewards of the organization, as able to control the growth of technology. Um, so we've talked a lot about sort of the control side, I feel like, and Warren mentioned some ideas. Warren, you mentioned this idea of differential value and this value premium where there's the value makes it worth the cost, right? This is worth it. I just want everyone's thoughts around innovation. Where and how is there room for innovation in a well-run, tightly controlled shop where you are controlling application sprawl responsibly, you are putting requests through their paces responsibly. How do you not become non-innovative? Anika, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think for us, and I think for many organizations, it started with just being more declarative and descriptive about what you're actually doing, right? So I'll give an example. Our broader board and enterprise talk a lot about incremental improvement, right? Um, and our board chair talks a lot about 1% improvement over and over and over again. And how do you continue to be mindful of the 1% incremental improvement? And that's really important. And I think there are a lot of folks that when you think about that, you think about friction and you talk about innovation, right? And resolving friction. It takes an out of the box thinking, it takes possibly a new solution. It could be a revamp of the old solution. It's a blue ocean theory of strategies coming together, dot, dot, dot. But then you have what people refer to from an innovation perspective as transformation. It is different than yesterday. There was a
Hmm.
thing that we were doing yesterday, and what we are doing today is wholesale different. It is a new product, completely new delivery mechanism, business model change, even how we're actually going to get paid or deliver services are going to be wholesale different. And then I think it's the everyday problem solving, right? It happens at the point of problem, right? Might not ever actually get higher than that, but it's sort of building in that culture of problem solving for everybody that's walking through the organization. And we call that a culture of innovation, right? We
Hmm.
want our teams to have a culture of innovation. And really what we mean by that is you see a problem, it could be a big problem, and it goes this route. It could be a small everyday problem. Can you solve it locally? But every day we want to make sure that we're thinking about how we solve problems, reduce friction. How do you
Hmm.
build a culture of innovation? And so we've tried to get more prescriptive about what those different things are and what we're actually trying to do. Because what we were finding is that oftentimes people would come and they were talking about innovation, but really what they were trying to get was incremental improvement. And then you'd have a person in the same quote unquote committee talking about innovation. And what they were really trying to say is, I actually want to stop doing this from a
Yeah,
business service perspective.
right.
And I want to do this from a business service perspective, right? And so the effort, strategic research, right? What you needed from a pilot program, like all of those things are drastically different in order to understand how you get from point A to point B. And so then what we've tried to do is to get clearer, also making sure that there's an understanding in the organization that one is not better than the other. So I
Hmm.
think that's the other thing that I think oftentimes you deal with is like this sort of stigma, the stigma that says, because I'm making incremental 1% improvement, or I'm being fiscally responsible, or I'm managing controls, I'm not innovative. And I think to myself all the time, hold on a second, like we've got KOR teams that have ingested mountains of new work year over year over year, yet never actually asked for more dollars from a budget perspective, the only way they could do that is to have been innovative.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no world in which that happens without innovation.
Right.
And so how do you get more descriptive, or sometimes, quite frankly, less descriptive? Because people keep making up words. People ask me about my title, and I'd say, I don't know. Please make it up. I do other duties as assigned. That's the job. I show up, I try to be here for the people, I try to solve problems, right? And I think that when you start to get into a place where you're trying to build that type of culture, it really is about, hey, I see this problem, this thing is happening, this experience could be better for our customer.
Mm-hmm.
I want to do something about that, right? What is the thing that you want to do? And then how do you actually get from point A to B? And then for us, it's clarity that at the end of the day, it's about a change that happens in our customer base. That's really innovation. So I tell our teams all the time, if tomorrow people don't do something different than they did today because our thing exists, our thing doesn't matter. Doesn't actually matter how much effort we put into it. Doesn't matter how much it cost. Doesn't matter how big it was. Doesn't matter how many users we expected to pick it up. If tomorrow is not different because of it, then the thing didn't matter at all. And so at the end of the day, the conversation is about the outcome we're trying to achieve. So what will be different tomorrow because we did the thing?
Very good. Very interesting. Okay.
So, the healthcare industry loves to have buzzwords. And it seems like every time we go to HIMSS or Chime or, whatever forum we're attending, that year, that buzzword basically drives educational sessions, it drives the conversation, it's, even in the marketing campaigns. So, Warren, with all due respect to your title, please, all due respect to your title, innovation is one of those buzzwords that now I know a lot of organizations feel like they have to live up to, but they don't know what the heck they're trying to live up to because it's a big word.
It's a big word.
It's very broad. And so 2 points that I think I at least when I talk to our staffs, our operational colleagues, and they say, well, how can we be more innovative? Two things to think about. One is to be very self-aware as an organization. We do not have developers. We have a few folks who can play around with some things and are super smart and can take components of applications and do some amazing things. But we do not have a room full of software developers. That is not us. That is not the organization that we are. We do not develop our own stuff. We buy
Mm-hmm.
it. So if an organization needs to be self-aware about that, about who they are, and then you apply that word again. So are we innovators? Well, we're not going to build something new if we're going to take a strategic initiative and have some innovative thinking around it. We're going to go buy what we need to make that happen. Most, probably we're going to do
Mm-hmm.
that. The second thing is that when the term comes up, we need to be more innovative. Well, who are we being innovative for? Who's the recipient of the innovation? And that sort of tailors down that big broad word again to be, all right, you want to be innovative? Well, let's start at the very basics of that. Well, innovative for whom? Is it our patients? Is it our providers? Is it the revenue cycle? What is it? And instead of just throwing that word out there and saying we have to be more of, the same thing, with AI. We got to have more AI. Well, we already have a ton. It's in it's like a piece of it's a part of the ingredients of of a recipe. It's not necessarily its own thing. And the same comes with innovation. So define the word, apply it appropriately, and don't just throw it out there or say we have to be more innovative just because 600 other organizations are using the same buzzword and getting crazy over it. So A little bit of
All right, Warren, we give you a chance to defend your title.
Yeah, that's a tall order, Anthony. I'm not sure we have the time for that either. But let me just, I guess, I agree with the sentiments that both Annika and Karen articulated here. Um, Innovation is, in my view, a overutilized word for sure in healthcare. Um, I do agree that oftentimes we conflate what we think of as true innovation and transformation compared to process improvement. And there is a place for both. They are both equally important. I get asked this all the time. Well, isn't one more important? No, you need both in order to have a thriving ecosystem. Having said all of that, I think each organization, as Kay just pointed out, has its own unique identity. We are at the University of Maryland Medical System very unapologetically an academic health system and a learning healthcare system. And as part of that DNA, research and discovery and innovation is a core tenet and a mission for us. So it isn't something that we simply add on as a tagline. It is one of the essences of by which we define ourselves. And so, hence the existence of my role within our ecosystem. Um, Having said that, we are also very intentional about what we mean and what we do about innovation. We do have investments in development. We are obviously adjacent to various professional schools, including the School of Medicine, the School of Nursing, the School of Pharmacy. And we have individuals embedded within our ecosystem who wake up every day thinking about how to disrupt and transform the healthcare ecosystem, whether that's on the delivery side, whether that's on the tech side, whether that's on the patient-facing or experience side, whatever have you, that is intertwined with the way we go about our business. And so in my role, my job is to figure out how to blend these assets and find those opportunities and sort of help steward or shepherd those opportunities towards the top so that we can address some of the more intractable problems within the healthcare ecosystem. We do pay a lot of attention to what we potentially build, what we buy, what we integrate, and where it makes sense to play. Obviously, we have a finite set of resources. We've got to figure out what the opportunity cost is of deploying those resources judiciously. But I come back to the fact that by the very essence of who we are as a health system and our identity, innovation for us takes on a certain meaning because it's a mission driven and a mission aligned value proposition for us.
All right, very good. I got an audience question. I'm just going to get a quick answer for how do you handle obtaining quote unquote discovery funding when the ask or request arises to solve a problem, buy a solution, or adopt or integrate new tech? Anika, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think it's first being really honest about, quite frankly, what is the mechanism and uses for your funding, right? And so if you are setting aside quote unquote research and development funding, then that funding having to be used for R&D, and then a different body of operational funding having to be used for operational improvements or capital or other types of things. But then I also think it's about being very honest about, quite frankly, do you have R&D funding or do you have impact funding? Meaning, I have investment funding if you are going to be able to give me a return, right? Or I have research and development funding, meaning you are able to go and understand whether or not problems even exist and how you might solve them, and I may or may not get a return. And so for us, I think it's just about being very, very clear about what funding types we actually have in real life and what can and cannot be done with those funding sources.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, we have time for a quick round of final thoughts. And unfortunately, that's about all we have time for, but I would love to keep talking to you folks. You're very bright people, and this has been a lot of fun. Um, Final piece of advice. So let's say let's postulate you're giving advice to someone that is struggling, a CIO type who is struggling with this, with the governance, struggling with new app requests, kind of the process has gone off the rails. Even if things aren't ultimately being purchased, maybe we're not talking about a lot of shadow IT, but let's talk about a process where it's kind of out of control. We've lost transparency. There's so many coming in. People are asking what happened to my request, and we don't even know where they are. It's just the process is, I'm guessing that happens in some places that things are all backwards and sideways. So I don't know. Your best advice to someone that has this process has gone awry in any way, and maybe I haven't stipulated the best way that it commonly goes awry, but it's gone awry somehow, and your best advice to that person. Kay, we'll start with you.
Simple is not disgraceful, ever. One single point of entry.
Mm-hmm.
If you can establish that and make that work so that it's easy for your operational partners, colleagues, clinicians or non-clinicians, to enter that to put something in that single point of entry, that's how you start to gain that control from that point forward, especially knowing where the requests are, when they were made, who made them, so forth and so on. Single point of entry.
There you go. Very good. Anika?
Do not underestimate the importance of relationships in governance.
All
How
right.
you sit down one-on-one, build relationships, the relationships between your applications leaders and the relationships between the business and the business. I often joke with our teams that our job is not to make decisions, our job is to facilitate Fight Club. We are master facilitators.
Yeah.
And we create forums where good discussion and healthy debate can
Yeah.
happen and decisions can be made. But I would say do not underestimate the importance of relationships, especially when things have gone awry.
Mm.
And make sure you ask your question to yourself about whether or not you can actually be the person to champion something. Maybe the reality is that the organizational culture will not constitute the technology team being responsible for governance. I don't know. Um, but ask yourself the hard questions.
Very good. That's a part of what Kay said before about we know who we are, and Warren was saying it. We know who we are, and
Mhm.
so that sounds like a really important element of good leadership. Warren, we'll give you the last word.
Sure. So I'll just borrow something Annika said. I think relationships are the key. I think alignment to strategic imperatives and knowing the why and having your sort of true north identified does help steer the ship in the right direction. And I think shared governance. I don't think this can be just the exclusive domain of technologists. I do think you need to engage and bring other stakeholders to the table, or else you do run the risk of a lot of the elements you described, Anthony. And then, finally, I think you have to figure out a way to not stifle, yes, I will use the I word, innovation, because it is imperative. The healthcare landscape is not going to um, uh, uh, prevail the way it has. Our CEO likes to say, what has gotten us to this point is not going to sustain us in the future. And so, if we think doing more of the same, and while the externalities around us are rapidly evolving and changing, is perhaps not being flexible and dynamic enough in order to accommodate that. So
Well,
those would be my words
that's
of
perfect, Warren.
advice.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. Well, we are out of time. Regarding continuing education, you could use the final slide in this deck. You'll get an email when the on-demand recording of this event is ready for viewing. If you want to work with us, you could reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team and go to our website to register for upcoming panels. With that, I want to thank this wonderful panel, Warren D'Souza, Anika Gardenhire, and Kamar Hefka. And I want to thank our sponsor, iHarbor, the University of Maryland Medical Systems Innovation Center, and you for attending. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you all so much.